I want to make some videos about rhythm and timing and comping. In this video, we're going to take a look at some rhythmic exercises that you can use, especially when you're using your metronome. So a friend of mine from back when I lived in Toronto, Rich Brown, who's a bass player in Canada, and you should also check out his YouTube channel. Lots of great content there. Even if you're not a bass player, you can still learn a lot from that. And he posted on Facebook a question. Hey there, jazz educators. I'm curious, what are your favorite rhythmic exercises? Since he is a super popular bass player in Toronto, Canada, he knows everybody in the US. So there was a lot of replies, some really good suggestions for how to use the metronome or how to practice rhythm. So I'm basically gonna steal those because I decided, well, I should work on some of those ideas. So I just stole some of those ideas shamelessly, and I'm gonna make a video about it, and we shall see what we can learn from that. So what we need here is a metronome. You can use your phone, obviously. I like to use this actual metronome because the phone can be a distraction. Having said that, I'm still gonna use my mobile. I'm gonna use an app called Tempo, which is a really good app. There's tons of apps out there. This one is really good. There are a few things that you can't do with a regular metronome that you can do with this app. You also need to be able to kind of read rhythm for this lesson. So first exercise is a very basic one. I think all of you have done it. It's just to use the metronome on beats 2 and 4. So here I have a Seiko metronome, which is not super good, but the good thing about this model is that it goes down to 30, which most metronome go down to 40 beats per minute. But so if this is 2 and 4, let's just play solar. You can use that metronome exercise when you're practicing comping or soloing. It's a really good exercise just to kind of try to make the changes with nobody comping for you. And it's a good idea to record that so that you can make sure that you're actually keeping the form. I would suggest that you have a metronome on 2 and 4 always when you're practicing jazz tunes or jazz scales or licks or what have you. For swing and for any kind of funk-based music, you should have a metronome on 2 and 4. When you're playing like bossa nova and Latin jazz, it's not necessarily a good idea to have the metronome on 2 and 4. And also, if you practice super fast tempos, you might want to have the metronome not on 2 and 4. So that was 80 beats per minute. If I want to make it more difficult, I drop the beat to 40, and now it's only on beat 4. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a little bit more difficult. So now the metronome isn't keeping time for you. You have to make sure that you're keeping the time. And of course you could do that. You could put it on any beat of the bar, or even like an 8th note upbeat, which is more difficult. But there's something about the beat 4 in jazz. We're going to talk about that later, that if you feel the beat 4 is important. There might be a historical reason for that. Like the really early tunes had emphasis on beat 4, and we keep that in mind. We'll get back to that later on. You need to be aware of what it is that you're actually practicing, because there are many different aspects of this. When people say, "Can you show me how to practice timing?" What do you actually mean? So there's one aspect of it which is time feel or swing feel, namely, or meaning, how does it feel when you're playing? Do you have a good time feel or a good swing feel or a good funk feel? Or any kind of genre, you might say that this or that guitar player is a really good reggae player or a funk player or what have you. That's one thing. That's kind of hard to put in words. It's more abstract. Some people think Keith Jarrett has a really good time feel and maybe not Bill Evans. I've heard that discussion. So it's also a matter of taste. Which time feel do you prefer? But it's hard to kind of show you how to get a good time feel. That's not really what we're practicing here, even though any kind of rhythmic exercise will improve your time feel, because you need to have a good understanding of rhythm to have a good time feel. Then there's the idea of keeping time. That was a little bit what we were practicing now, so that you don't speed up or slow down. So then you can use the metronome to practice that. It's not that bad to speed up, I don't think. I've heard really good musicians and groups and bands speed up. You don't want to slow down. It's brutal when you slow down. You don't want to be a musician that slows down. You also need to have an ability to understand what's going on rhythmically. It might be a complex rhythm that can throw you off if you don't understand it, because you're not feeling it correctly or not hearing it correctly. This can happen if you play really advanced rhythmic stuff like fusion or something like that, or modern classical music where it can be very complex rhythmically. It can also be because you're playing some kind of world music where the rhythmic ingredients are really complicated. Then you need to be able to kind of decode what's going on and to understand conceptually how different rhythms work. So I think that's a little bit what we're working on here. Feeling rhythms and keeping time and understanding rhythms. So let's move on. If I want to make it more difficult, I can put the metronome click on the beat 4 of every other bar. Then I need to use a metronome that goes down slower. And this one does that. The app I told you about, which is called Tempo. So it looks like that. So this one goes down ridiculously slow. We'll put it on 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Boom. That was actually one of the suggestions on that Facebook thread by Ted Quinlan, who was my guitar teacher and the head of the guitar department when I was in jazz college. And he suggested that you warm up with this, I think, which is something I've been doing these last weeks. So you pick a standard and you do this for like 10 minutes. So you need a timer. I use like an egg timer. And there are timers obviously in your mobile phone. It's a little bit weird to use two apps at the same time. So I like to use an actual egg timer. I've had this for years. And I set it to like 10 minutes. And then I just try to do that exercise and play a standard. And you want to keep it really simple. Maybe just comping a Charleston rhythm. 1, 2, 3, click. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, click. So, and you play a standard for 10 minutes as opposed to warming up like this. You know, it's a different kind of warming up. let's say that you try to do this and you can do it without any, effort. That's great. Then you don't have to do that much, especially if you're like a working musician and you're playing. But if you can't do that at all, it's just not happening. Then you maybe try the metronome on beat 4 of every bar and do that for a month, and then try to do every other bar. So be patient. There are actually some people I've heard say that you can't really perceive slower tempo than 40 or something as an actual pulse. The human can't hear that as some kind of pulse. I don't know if that's true, but if that's the case, what we're doing here is we're using the metronome just to make sure that we're not speeding up. Here's an exercise that I've never seen. You put the metronome on beat 1, and then on beat 2, and 3, and then on beat 4, and then you leave a bar open, which gives you like a 5-beat figure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's like a 5 grouping, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3. If you do that, what is important here is that the last shot is you need to anticipate, or you should anticipate the next bar. You don't have to, but you should be able to do that. So, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That should be the following bar. And again, there's that magic beat 4. I'll try to do this with solar, bear with me, because this is not very easy. So, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? That was actually a bit fast. If you want to make it really difficult, you use a loop pedal and you loop that and try to play that as a cycle. At some point it's going to add up and repeat. I'm not sure how many choruses. And then when you listen back to it, you're not going to hear the click, right? Unless you plug in the metronome into the loop pedal. And then you try to play over that, and that's really difficult. There are a few things I'm not going to talk about in this video. That we're not going to talk about a 6/8 or 12/8, the 6/8 clave. I have talked about that in previous videos. Like the 6/8 is very important for understanding jazz. But since I've already made a video about that, I'm gonna skip that. But this next exercise is kind of related to that. You wanna use triplets and use the click on one of the triplets. This is 60 beats per minute. So if you have a 4/4 and use the thick triplets, like 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is Isn't She Lovely by Stevie Wonder, right? Notice also that I'm starting with the upstroke, so I get the downbeats as downstrokes. Up, down. That was something Ross Bolton showed me, the funk guitarist, when he was my teacher at Musicians Institute back in the day. But now obviously I had the click on the first triplet, 8th note triplet. Let's think of that as the third triplet. Triplet, 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 trip. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what happens there is that you start to hear it, that very specific part of the triplet becomes very clear, if you know what I mean. I think it's that kind of attention to detail that separates the more professional musician from an amateur, that you can really hear that triplet as something very specific, and you know exactly where that is. So you hear it as a, whereas if you don't really care, you know, you're just like, so hearing subdivisions with a very clear understanding, that's what professional musicians can do. They can really hear the subdivisions very, very clearly. Notice also that I'm standing up today when I'm doing this video, because when I practice this stuff, it's like you need to move your body, right? Like it's a body kind of thing. Unless you're an acoustic player who sits down normally, or you play the archtop or something. When we play electric guitar, at least I do, I most of the time stand up if I'm on a gig. So I should be standing up when I'm practicing as well, but it's kind of hard to stand up for 10 hours or whatever. Another thing is that on the same kind of, on the same topic, we're actually practicing something that we have that is useful as a musician. The joke is that guitarist kind of practices soloing 95% and comping 5%. But when you're playing in a situation, in a real playing situation, you're comping 95% and soloing 5% if you're lucky. So we should practice comping. We're not really practicing comping now, even though this exercise was kind of a comping exercise. I'm gonna make a video about comping, but it's so specific depending on what genre we're talking about. Even with jazz, you comp totally different if you're playing traditional jazz or if you're playing modern jazz or Latin jazz. Then it's different if you're playing Brazilian music, if you're comping reggae, soul, funk, R&B. And as a guitarist today, you're supposed to kind of know all of this stuff, which is a lot of work, but it's also very inspiring to learn about every possible genre of music, I think. Let's move on to some other exercises here, and now I'll torture you with my singing again, because the next exercise is to take a jazz head that is kind of repetitive, or that is repetitive, kind of like a riff, and sing that and clap different rhythms to it. So we're gonna take Sunny Moon for 2. That goes like this, right? Some of you might be commenting now that or thinking that's not exactly how it goes. There's so many different recordings and versions of this tune, and this is not exactly the original way the melody is played, but this is how I like to play the melody. So we're gonna think of this as a B-flat blues, like a regular blues, not a jazz blues, but just a blues in B-flat. So let's say this is the tempo, 60, which means that the tempo is 120, right? Because we have the metronome on 2 and 4. First rhythm we're gonna clap is a Charleston rhythm. So, 1, Charleston, and try to restrain from don't tap your foot. Sorry, and then comp. So some of the notes you're clapping are gonna coincide with the actual melody, and sometimes they're gonna happen between, so it's important to figure out what's going on. Now let's move that Charleston rhythm to, let's move it, displace it, so start on beat 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, comp. Let's displace it one more quarter note, so it starts on beat 3. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, Charleston. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. There it is. Now, here's the tricky part about this. That last 8th note, again, it should be anticipating the next bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Again, so you notice here, it's not super easy. So I would set a timer, like maybe even like 20 minutes. Because after a while, you kind of get into it and it becomes second nature. The last one is the trickiest one, I think. That one, by the way, we just did is the one that fits the melody the best, I think. So the next one is gonna be on beat 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. But it's almost like that becomes anticipation, right? So quarter note anticipation. So it's shifted, so it starts before the first beat. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Again, there's that magic 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna leave that for now because, I need to practice that myself. Okay, so now I'm gonna go back to beat, click on every beat, and we're gonna do the Clave. Understanding Afro-Cuban music and the Clave that they do there is extremely important. And I have a video on Latin jazz where I go over the Clave. So I'm not an expert. You could like dig deep into this stuff, but you need to have a basic understanding at least of the Clave. So a some Clave sounds like this, right? Dum dum bum bum bum. Boom boom boom. Yeah, that's a 2-3 Clave. Because there's 2 claps in the first bar and 3 in the second bar. Again, you have that 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom. 4. That could be anticipating the next part, depending on the tempo. Notice now it's more of a straight feel. It's not as swung as previously, and playing. Doing a great job there, and I messed up a little bit. Instead of me practicing the shit out of this stuff and then showing you how great I am, I think it's better to kind of show you that I'm also, you know, learning this stuff. It's not easy to do, and we all need to work on this stuff. This example, again, I would set a metronome for, I might do that tomorrow. So once you get it into your system, then you kind of have it. It's like learning how to ride a bike, but you still also need to kind of keep it up. So you could turn that clave around, and there's also something called the rumba clave, where the last note is on an 8th note upbeat, which gives you that, then it should be anticipation. So 1, 2, 3, 4, gun, 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 gun. If you've never heard of like these things, like the clave and the Afro-Cuban music, you should definitely check that out. There's tons of information about that, and it's a very important aspect of jazz. Then there was some suggestions from my mentor at Humber College when I went there. Pat LaBarbera is the legendary saxophone player that played with everybody, Buddy Rich band for many years, Elvin Jones. He suggested that you take a bebop head and displace everything by a quarter note. That's an extremely difficult exercise depending on which bebop head you choose. And I have made a video about that way back, and not a lot of people watched the video. So the funny thing is that these videos, this topic is not very popular, which is a shame because this is a very important thing to practice as a jazz musician. It might be even what is holding you back as a player. Some students, they try to play scales and licks and all this stuff, and then something is not right when they're playing, you know what I mean? Like, even though they know a lot of stuff and they have good technique and good chops, what have you, when they play something is kind of not quite right, it's often that this kind of rhythmic aspect is lacking. So they go home and they practice scales even more. And, you know, then it's a good idea to do something else, work on this stuff. But it's not as sexy as practicing, you know, the latest Mike Marino licks or what have you. So I'm not going to do this exercise now, but I have talked about that, as I said in the previous video, called displacement. I like to take a section of a tune or a head or a melody and displace it instead of displacing the whole thing. It's a bit much. If nothing else, it's very important to work on this stuff, because if you play with a musician who do this and you're not prepared, it can be very, very, you know, you throw you off. And it happens in other genres. It's not a jazz thing. I've played with gospel singers that do this. They sing everything like kind of off from what you think it is, if you know what I mean. And so again, it's about control. And a lot of people develop this if you play with great musicians, and they might never have practiced this stuff. It's just something that you develop over the years as a professional musician. But I also know that most musicians that I know have worked on this stuff at some point at least. And judging by the answers that so many answered in this Facebook thread, that's a kind of a sign that all these musicians, they do work on this stuff, and they have their own kind of ideas and exercises. Pat LaBarbera also suggested working on two tunes that are very also kind of repetitive jazz heads, like Sonny Monfortune. So one was called Wood Shopper's Ball, which I have to admit I've never heard of, but this rhythm I hear musicians play all the time when they're comping. I just didn't know that it was from an actual tune. So if we have a blues, D flat, like old style, with 6 chords. then E flat minor. So it's kind of like a Count Basie blues. So that's the melody. That 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. So that's another tune that you could use all the Charleston rhythm, the stuff that we did before, and sing this do da 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 da. This is also very good for practicing with the metronome on beat 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Two, three, four, 1, 2, bam, 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 dum, dum. There's that 4. So this is not Count Basie. I think it's Woody Herman. Another tune like that is The Champ. It sounds like this. Now we have a blues in A flat. So the melody goes like this: 2, 3, 4. 4, 2, 3, 4, 1. So it's a repetitive riff. Do, do, oh. That's another good tune for developing that kind of feel for that 4. So this head you could also, try to sing it. You don't have to sing it great. Just try to hum it. Do 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 da 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 now I was anticipating on every chord on the beat 4, which is maybe a little bit too much. The idea here is that you need to be able to do that, so that you can feel that ba-da, do-do-do-do-do, ba-da. It's a very important ingredient in jazz to understand that. And Pat LaBarbera said something about pushing beat 4 and holding it. I'm not sure what he means by that, but so I'm going to suggest some books that are good for this. There are some books for reading rhythm, and one is called Encyclopedia of Reading Rhythms from Musicians Institute Publishing. If you're not super good at reading rhythm, because that's the first thing you need to be able to do. And then Fundamentals of Guitar by Miles Okazaki, which I have talked about. It's one of the best explanations of polyrhythm, or polypulse as he calls it, that I've seen, and I have made a video about that way back, so I'll link to that. That's another aspect, being able to play poly pulses, you can do that with tapping a pulse and playing something else, or singing one and playing something else, or as a guitar player, you can split the hand into bass and melody. And then there's another good book that, to my shock, I can't find it. I've lost it. I might have brought it to work, and hopefully it's at work. Jerry Bergonzi's book on rhythm, I think it's called Melodic Rhythm. And one of the best books I've used, and it's definitely a book that can change your playing. He talks a lot about using different groupings of like 5s and 7s and stuff like that. That's also something I talked about in the previous video where I talked about that book, and I'll link to that as well. So let's say you take a 5-note grouping, could be 2 quarter notes and 2 quarter note upbeats, like bum 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 up up down down. That's a 5-note grouping. That's 5 8th notes, right? So bum 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 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5. I like to think of it as down down up up down down up up. Let's say I take a blues in F and comp using that rhythm, and let's say I start on beat 2. It could sound like this. 1. Let's do it again. 1. You could continue, obviously, and at some point it's gonna add up. And I wrote it out 2 more choruses, and this is on my Patreon page. So there's a lot of stuff like that in that Bergonzi book that I can't find at the moment. And so here I'm thinking of each like 2 boom boom as one thing. So sometimes I'm anticipating a lot. This could also be something you do when you're soloing, right? Like that, and people do that all the time. You could also do 7s and all sorts of combinations. So I'm kind of just going really quick here. I'm just kind of telling you about this concept, and if you want to explore that, I really recommend that Bergonzi book. He even has a tune that is called On and Off or something like that, which uses this rhythm, which is a contrafact on Solar. So I can't remember the name of that tune. If you know, please let me know in the comments. I'm gonna leave you with one more thing, which is like the Indian system of Konnakol. So I'm not an expert at this by any stretch of the imagination, but studying the Indian rhythmic system is really, really good, even if you're just scratching the surface. You can check out John McLaughlin's videos on this stuff, and I'm just going to show you a very basic system for this, because it really helps you to internalize difficult rhythms. So we're going to do 7. So I don't know if it's 7/8, 7/4. This is kind of a Western idea. It's just 7. So I set the metronome to 7 to 7. And then we're going to use these syllables taki ta ta ka di me. I tend to say taki ta ta ka di mi because that's how I've practiced it in the past. I'm apologizing if I mispronounce it. There are different syllables for this depending on if you group it as 3 or 4 or 4 plus 3. And but let's do taki ta ta ka di me, and we're gonna clap this pattern. down, down, up, two, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's a clap, 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 turn, clap, 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 turn, 1, 2, 3, 4. But let's say the rhythm is that, or let's say the syllables ta, ki, ta, ta, ka, di, me, ta, ki, ta, ta, ka, di, me, ta, ki, ta, ta, di, me, ta, ki, ta, ta, ta. Now I'm gonna try to say it twice as fast without changing the clapping pattern. Taki ta ta ka di mi taki ta ka di mi taki ta ta ka di ki ta ka di me taki ta ka di me taki ta ka di mi taki ta ka di me. And I'm back. Ke ta ka di fast taki ta ka taki ta ka di me taki ta ka di mi taki ta ka. Now I'm gonna say it, which is gonna be more difficult. Slow half as fast. Ta, ki, te, ta, ka, de, mi. Ta, ki, te, ta, ka, de, mi. You could try to do triplets if you really want to push yourself. Takite taka de mi takite taka di mi takite taka de mi takite taka de mi takite taka di mi takite taka de mi ta. I'm not sure if I did that right, but let's try to do it without the metronome. A little faster. Taka di takite taka de mi takite taka. Taki teta kade mi taki taka di mi taki teta kade mi taki taka di mi taki teta kade taki slower. Ta ki te ta ka de mi ta ki te ta ka de mi taki teta kade mi taki taka di mi taki teta kade taki teta kade mi ta. So that was a very embarrassingly low-level Konnakol lesson, because these Indian musicians, they take it extremely far and just have to type in into YouTube Konnakol and you will see some ridiculous stuff. I have taken some tabla lessons, but the point here is not to become an expert in South Indian music or North Indian music or whatever. There's not enough time to learn everything, but I want to kind of learn basic stuff because it can really help you to understand rhythms. Because I think some of you were kind of confused what I just did there. How did that work? So I'm not going to give you the answer. You might have to write it out to see how the syllables and the clapping work together. But that's the process I want you to do, because then you kind of start to conceptualize advanced rhythms. Well, it's not very advanced, it's just a 7. So it gives you this kind of understanding of rhythm, which is very important. And also internalize it in your body. Right? So these so on my Patreon page, I hope that was useful to you. Please let me know in the comments if you have a rhythmic exercise that you use and you want to share with us. And yeah, I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I shall see you next time.